Hello everyone, and welcome to this video about the new 4K HDR version of the movie Terminator by James Cameron. Yes, I know, she's arriving late, and everything has already been said about this edition, and many reviews have already been published. And for once, the discussions were more than heated. So once again, I propose to you, with the help of David Fakrikian, founder of Dolby Vision, an anthology video on the evolution of the film Terminator in home video, which I hope will allow you to take a step back, and it will also be an opportunity to set the record straight.
So, buckle up, because we're going to make a jump through time and go back to 1985 when I discovered this movie. And let me tell you, it wasn't in Dolby Vision nor in Dolby Atmos, but on VHS on a good old 14-inch TV with bleeding colors, in pan and scan, and with really bad sound.
And given the reactions of some people to this 4K edition, I am not sure they would have survived watching it under those conditions. Yet I remember being completely overwhelmed by the power of the show I had just witnessed. Because despite the poor quality of the image by today's standards, at the time, watching Terminator on VHS at home was a real luxury. For the record, the film was released in 1984 and was shot on 35mm with spherical lenses, Aeroflex 35BL and 35-3 cameras, as well as Fry's Mitchell 35R3. The initial format is 1.37 by 1, and the film will be projected in 1.85 by 1. As you know now, the original mix was done in mono due to lack of funds. Before starting, I would also like to draw your attention to the Harlan Ellison case, an author of an innumerable number of short stories and scripts for television series like The Outer Limits or even Star Trek. When Terminator was released, Ellison threatened Cameron with a lawsuit because, according to him, the film included many similarities with one of his stories. An agreement was reached between the author and the production company, Emdel. A credit mentioning Ellison's work had to be added to the end credits. You will see that this little anecdote is important. Here we are at the end of 1984, and if we set aside the Super 8 versions provided by Duran, the first home video version of Terminator was provided by Thorn-Emi on CED or Select-O-Vision, a medium developed by RCA marketed between 1981 and 1986. It consisted of a caddy that enclosed a PVC disc. A few months later, in March 1985, the first VHS and Betamax tapes appeared, still published by Thorn-Emi. This first batch contains the film without any modifications, and the original American mono mix called Domestic Mix. Then finally comes the Laserdisc. In France, the film will be available in VHS, Laserdisc, and V2000, a European format developed by Philips and Grunding, that was available between 1979 and 1988. I embarked on a high-flying mission, namely to digitize its sources, and believe me, it wasn't simple. Between the multitude of ratios, frame rates, color standards, all of it needing to coexist in an HDR workflow, let me tell you, I got myself a few headaches. You will certainly find copied editions with different aspects and colorimetry. Even if these analog captures were not made with high-end equipment, which guarantees strict adherence to the original signal, they were all done within the same workflow and processed in the same way. There will be differences because PAL-SECAM and NTSC had different color management. Moreover, these signals are digitized, so they are displayed with sizes and color representations that do not necessarily match the displays of the time. I would have really liked to show you the image from my CED. Unfortunately, it is not doing very well. The image it is supposed to deliver is roughly equivalent to VHS. You can see in the Thorn-Emi editions that they all use the same master, although there are small disparities in quality and colorimetry. You can also notice that the three versions have slight differences in framing. If you look at the yellow part of the truck, it is not in the same position in the three images. However, this remains anecdotal. Once the initial VHS and Betamax copies were sold out, and following pressure from Ellison's lawyer, a new batch will be produced, this time with the mention of Harlan Ellison after the music credits. On the left, you can see the Betamax version with the Ellison credit that was added and scrolls differently from the rest of the credits. On the right, you have the original VHS version without the credit. However, the credit will be absent from the Laserdisc. Laserdisc was known for having a speed issue. The film, for some unknown reason, was at a frame rate closer to 25 frames per second instead of the 29.97 required by the NTSC standard. This causes a slight acceleration and alteration of the audio pitch. It seems that the speed issue is common to both the VHS and the Beta, of that same year if compared to the laserdisc from 1991, which plays normally. Mono was also modified by the company Chase Productions to be upgraded into a kind of hybrid stereo that is not strictly speaking stereo because the differences between the right and left channels are too small. The mystery remains unsolved about this track. With this overview, we can see that only the Betamax, VHS, and Laserdisc have significantly identical framings. All other formats have very different framings. Despite the poor quality of the V2000 version, it is the one that offers the widest image with a format equivalent to 1.66:1. In 1986, Vestran Video released the film in Japan on Laserdisc and VHD, a fairly popular format in the region at the time. Like the CED, it comes in a sleeve covering a vinyl disc, and these versions are very different from the previous ones. The VHD image is generally much clearer and more saturated, and the Laserdisc is even a notch above. Even though it is technically of very good quality for the time, its overall tone gives the film a completely different aspect. In 1987, a new VHS was released by HBO Canon in the American market. This version features the Harlan Ellison credit arriving somewhat awkwardly at the beginning of the end credits, which makes it the third version of the film. A fourth version will be made for broadcast on the HBO channel with the reintroduction of the Orion logo in the presentation. The Terminator's point of view shots are stretched. This version will serve as the basis for a new Laserdisc offered by Image Entertainment in 1989 in the United States to replace the defective version from 1985. It uses the HBO broadcast master but does not include the Harlan Ellison mention, and contrary to what the cover says, the film is indeed in mono, and this time at the correct speed. The 1989 Laserdisc presents a very pronounced yellowish tint. We arrive in 1991 on the occasion of the release of Terminator 2. A new edition of Terminator is released on Laserdisc with, for the first time, the 1.85:1 projection format respected and with the monodomestic mix. This time, the Harlan Ellison credit appears at the beginning of the end credits, making this edition the fifth and final version of Terminator concerning this credit. The same year in Japan, the only open matte edition of the film was released by Orion Home Video. You can see the entire printed surface on the film with rounded edges. So we have pan and scan versions, where the image was zoomed to fill the screen with sometimes different framings depending on the editions, an open matte version, and a widescreen letterbox version 1.85:1. As you can see, we are in 1991, and the film has already undergone several modifications and transformations, but it's far from over. In 1995, a new THX Laserdisc edition was released by Image Entertainment, presenting the film with a new master that became a reference in terms of image quality for many fans. Made from an inner positive, the image is clearer and the colors have been reworked. The audio seems to be taken from the previous Laserdisc, but it shows some weaknesses in the dynamics. The bass and high frequencies have been noticeably cleaned. In 1996, the last Japanese Laserdisc THX will be released, published by Pioneer. Then TF1 will release a collector's edition in France, including an original version and a dubbed French version. We are in 1997, and the first Terminator DVD is released, published by Image Entertainment. It comes from the same master used for the THX Laserdisc of 1995. The DVD was in 4:3 letterbox. The mono mix will no longer be 1.0, but in the form of a 2.1 track, with two identical right and left channels and the low frequencies directed to a subwoofer. A second pressing of the American edition will be made, on which the 2.1 mix was replaced by the mono 1.0 mix. This edition will also be available in Japan with the same features. In France, Terminator will also be in the form of a DVD released by TF1 Video. It seems that the publisher wanted to make Terminator the first title available on DVD in France, with a new French and English stereo track. Unfortunately, the project could not be completed. The same year, a rather strange edition is released in Germany. Terminator is presented with a greenish grading in a 1.66:1 format, and there are two versions, a long and a short one, with the eye scene completely cut. So I skipped over the censored versions from one country to another. Between shortened scenes or ones completely cut for TV broadcasts, it's absolutely unmanageable to catalog. In the year 2000, Cameron requested a 16:9 version for the DVD, and a new Dolby Digital EX sound mix will be made by Gary Redstorm. The film was first released in Zone 2 in France. The mono track disappeared, some framings were altered, and the intro text was not present on the image. A new version will be released in Zone 1 in 2001. It will be the special edition that will be corrected. There are differences in color grading on certain scenes between the Zone 1 DVD and the Zone 2 DVD. The extras from the Region 2 DVD will be included. Some will be extended, and others will be added. So let's open Pandora's box and take a closer look at these mixes. So far, we had the domestic mix in 1.0 on the VHS, Betamax, CED, and Laserdiscs of 1989, 91, 95, and 96. The fake stereo on the Laserdisc from 1985, the 2.1 on the DVD from 1997, and in 2001, a new mono mix in 2.0 is present. And in some places, there are subtle sound effects that appear in the 2001 mono, but are absent from the original mono in the new Dolby EX track. Listen carefully to the scene where the armorer takes the Uzi and hands it to the T-800. A clicking sound appears on the new mono.
You know your weapons, buddy. Any one of these is ideal for home defense. You know your weapons, buddy. Any one of these is ideal for home defense. You know your weapons, buddy. Any one of these is ideal for home defense.
Same here. A tire screech is extended on the rise section only on the 2001 mono.
All right, listen. All right, listen. All right, listen.
There are other changes here and there, but the most notable will be the reorchestration of the music in 5.1. And the modification of the sound design for numerous gunshots. Needless to say, it wasn't to everyone's taste. In 2003, a VCD was released in Hong Kong, followed by a UMD version for the PlayStation Portable. In 2005, an Ultimate Edition version was released in Zone 2 with an English and French DTS HD Master audio track, but still without mono. This edition includes the version from the previous Zone 2 edition, but this time contains a title card at the beginning. The image appears processed to reduce dirt and seems less defined than the previous edition. In 2006, the first Full HD Blu Ray was released, which uses the same master as the 2001 DVD, with an English track and 5.1 uncompressed PCM. The encoding quality leaves much to be desired. It's still MPG-2, and the dirt and other imperfections have never been so visible. We finally arrive in 2012, where the film is re-released in a version completely restored in terms of image by Lori Digital, which became Reliance Media Work, and will be regraded by Skip Kimball, who had already collaborated with Cameron on Abyss, Terminator 2, Titanic, and Avatar. The new grading will cause a lot of irritation. The disc still does not contain the original mono mix, and many bonuses have disappeared. Let's pause for a moment on this restoration. The original negatives were scanned in 4K, and logarithmic DPX files were produced. These are low-contrast images that contain a lot of information, allowing them to be processed in post-production. These files are then given to the restoration department. All scratches, dirt, and other defects are meticulously corrected frame by frame. The shots are then assembled to reconstruct the film, resulting in a digital intermediate likely in 2K, which will be calibrated to produce the HD SDR Rec.709 version for home video and the DCI P3 version for theaters. For your information, these logarithmic files also allow producing HDR, but this was obviously not the case in 2012. Whether we like the new grading or not, Terminator has been rejuvenated, because from 1985 until 2012, no matter the edition released, the image was very dirty. Here are all the laserdisc and DVD editions I've collected. They all contain the same dirt to varying degrees. Only the 2012 version is free of it. For the first time as well, the film benefits from much better management of dynamics and highlights. Scanning in logarithmic allows for the recovery of much more detail than previous telescenes. Regarding the changes in colorimetry, we will return to that later. In 2015, a special edition was released in Japan, the Japanese dubbed complete version, containing several Japanese audio tracks from various sources, such as the mono from the VHS, different versions from television broadcasts, and especially a Japanese 5.1 mix based on Gary Ray Storm's version, but with original sound effects reinstated. They even reattached the sound effects that had been added to the 2001 International Mono Mix, like tire screeches. And we arrive at this famous new 4K HDR edition, a jewel for some, a scandalous object for others. In terms of extras compared to previous editions, it is still quite poor. We find deleted scenes with or without commentary by James Cameron, creating the Terminator, the visual effects and music, Terminator Closer to the Real Thing, and Unstoppable Force, the legacy of the Terminator. Where did the supplements from the 2001 edition go? Van Ling's documentaries, the trailers, the script, the hidden menus? Why are they making so little effort to provide us with quality interactivity? Those DVD menus, though dated, were still much more fun than this still image. This edition was heavily criticized for being an upscale of the 2012 2K Master, enhanced by the use of Park Road tools based on artificial intelligence. This triggered many strong reactions, deeming this restoration unworthy compared to some work done on other titles. I suggest we lay down our arms and take a step back. As I just showed you, from 1985 to 2012, the film had many editions, all made from telecine, a device that allows filming the reel and directly transferring the image to video. The quality, precision, and fidelity of color reproduction are much lower than what a film scan can produce. The film was restored in 2012. Why do you absolutely want us to do a restoration of a film that was restored 10 years ago? It is nothing more than transferring the 2012 version to a 4K HDR Blu Ray. Just like we went from laserdisc to DVD, just like we went from DVD to Blu Ray in 2006. If we set aside the aesthetic aspect, the previous restoration was done from 4K scans. Even if the digital intermediate was in 2K, they just resized it to HDR10 and Dolby Vision formats. Each 4K release does not necessarily involve a restoration, especially if it is recent. You're going to tell me it's not real 4K, it's not HDR. So let's dig a little deeper. And I'm not advocating for anyone, nor trying to justify anything. Let's start with the size of the image. I suggest a little workshop. Here is a shot that was filmed by a Red camera straight in 6K. We will call this charming young woman Janine. We are going to put Janine in a 4K timeline and export a 4K 10-bit DPX image and export the same image in 2K 10-bit DPX. I re-import these two images, still in a 4K timeline. You can clearly see that the 2K is half the size. If I upscale this 2K to 4K without adding any enhancement, I challenge you to see the difference between Janine 2K and Janine 4K on a TV from a normal viewing distance and without pausing the image. You see I switch from one to the other, the differences are almost undetectable. Okay, you might say that with a film source, it's necessarily different. Fine, then hold on. I suggest we reproduce this experiment. but this time starting from a positive 35mm scope, scanned at a resolution of 4096 by 3484 pixels in DPX 16 bits. From this scan, we will make a 2K version that we will upscale later to 4K to simulate what was done in terms of resolution if this edition was indeed upscaled to 4K from a 2K digital intermediate itself made with 4K scans. And we will take this same image that was scanned by the same machine, but in 2K. So we are going to compare the native 4K with its reduced 2K version, then re-upscaled to 4K, and a version scanned in 2K, upscaled to 4K. Here is the 4K scan that I export in 2K. I re-import this image and drag it into a 4K timeline and adjust the aspect to have the scope image de-anamorphosed. This image is very damaged and contains numerous defects that will precisely allow us to see the differences in terms of details. And contrary to everything we've been told, the difference is negligible. You have to zoom in 300% to notice a lack of definition. The grain is less well-defined, and indeed, on ultra-fine details, there is a difference. But unless you are glued to the screen and paused on the image, it is almost impossible to tell the difference. The gap widens if you compare it with the 2K scan. But once again, the difference is really marginal. If the scan was done under good conditions in 4K, as was probably the case with Terminator in 2012, even if the image was downscaled to 2K to be worked and graded, re-upscaling it to 4K afterward is not really a problem in itself. I am sorry to shatter a myth, but no, a 2K upscale is not the disaster or scam you imagine. I am not saying that we can work exclusively with 2K, but these controversies on social networks are mostly sterile and spread by people who are factually incapable of proving their claims. Keep in mind that what I just showed you is obviously not a universal truth. There are so many parameters that can influence and make each case different. Look at the difference in definition between the 2006 Blu Ray and the 2012 one. Both are in high definition, yet the sources and production methods are completely different, and the result is visible in the image. Let's address the use of AI and the issues that have been pointed out, particularly in this scene with the distortions on Linda Hamilton's face. We are talking about an 11-second shot where only a few frames pose a problem on about 2% of the total area. And if we pause on the most shocking images and compare them with the 2013 version, I'm sorry, there's not so much to protest about. Okay, there are some artifacts, but we're at a 300% zoom pause. In motion, it is completely acceptable. Some point out distortions on the Honda logo. Sure, they are certainly due to motion blur. There are still some artifacts there, but given the size of the logo in the image, I think we can live with it. I'm not saying it's perfect, but to say it's a disaster might be an exaggeration. If we compare with the reference version, namely the DVD or THX laserdisc, we have something messy instead. Yes, there are sometimes issues with certain display text, which I agree were not present in the previous version, but this remains minor compared to the overall gain. There are inconsistencies sometimes in the spatialization because the artificial intelligence wants to make things absolutely in focus that should remain blurred. But compared to the issues with True Lies, it's completely different. It never took me out of the film. It's not perfect, that's for sure. It's sometimes too emphasized if you focus on the texture of the clothes, but overall the sharpness of the film is really impressive. Look at what we bought for decades. There are still shots where the focus is really very approximate, and that you could scan in 8 or 12K, it won't change anything. I don't think they used artificial intelligence to compensate for the upscale from 2 to 4K. I sincerely think he wanted to sharpen his image, and I'm even willing to bet that if he had rescanned his film in 4K, he would have applied the same treatment. By comparing this new edition to the old one, the similarities are striking. It is, pixel for pixel, the same source with a few exceptions. Indeed, some shots have slightly shifted framing. Does this mean it's a new scan, though? Hard to say. What did they start with to make this new version? Did they begin with cleaned log files and redo the 2012 grading in an HDR workflow? Did they start from the SDR Rec 709 version, as many claim? In my opinion, it's unlikely. We have values that exceed Rec 709 and much richer and more detailed colorimetry. I think they at least started from the DCI-P3 version and made some tweaks. But again, I'm not certain. In any case, the result, from my point of view, is superior to the previous edition with more natural skin tones and saturations. However, we still retain the green and blue tints that were introduced in 2012. Let's talk about the color grading and what some denounce as revisionism. Yes, Cameron altered his film in 2012, and you didn't like that because it doesn't represent the film as you discovered it when it was released in theaters or on video. Here we have two issues. The first is that for many, once the film is released, it should not be altered. The second is that your perception is fixed on the quality of the version through which you discovered this film. Terminator belongs to its creator and producers. Factually, he can modify his film as he wishes, whether you like it or not. Unless I am mistaken, no law can state otherwise. Yes, the gap between the 2012 version and the previous one is huge. But let me show you all the versions I have collected that are from before 2006. Some show just as large differences. We've gotten used to these versions, but does that mean they are flawless? By looking at this mosaic, we see images with dominant yellows, pinks, blues. Which one is the most accurate? Not the green one, you might say. Certainly there are scenes where it's very pronounced and where the naturalness of the skin tones has been somewhat harmed. But overall, I find the film much more accurate and realistic. Look at this fire. It's pink in 2006, and the color is much more natural in 2012. And this color cast is present in a good part of the movie across several editions. Look at the skin tones, the clothes, it's dripping with magenta. And the clipping, shall we talk about it? The completely burnt out whites on Lance Henriksen's former shirt? The quality of this image is bad. It lacks definition, the whites are blown out, it bleeds magenta everywhere. And look at this car, even the asphalt is pink. Same with this sunny shot. The richness and detail of the color grading are much greater in the 2012 grading than in the previous one, which once again is very marked by magenta. And we can see that these changes are not consistent throughout the footage. In this scene, it's much more nuanced. Is the oversaturated blue tint better in this image? Many reject the image from 2012 because it has been modified. But ask yourself about the quality of the 2006 transfer. Is it really respectful of the original material? I have seen reactions from people concerned about the use of AI and image distortions who much prefer the 2006 Blu Ray. That's your right, I respect it. But between a few aberrations on a tiny part of the image and an image lacking definition, with blown out whites, dripping dominance, and of course, not to forget mountains of dirt, personally, my choice is quickly made. I have seen some screenshots highlighting differences between the HDR version and the 2012 version, accusing the latter of engaging in revisionism on a version already accused of revisionism. So let's re-invite Janine. This file is a raw file, which means unprocessed, and it contains a lot of information. We have the possibility to convert it into any desired color space. Let's make an HDR version and an SDR version, but without applying any calibration values. It's just converting from one space to another. Here is Janine in high dynamic range, and here is Janine in standard dynamic range, on which an additional conversion is applied to display the standard dynamic range correctly in my high dynamic range workflow. I hope you're following me. This image has colors and intensities that cannot be correctly represented in SDR. Look at her yellow sweater. The color is different between these two versions. Look at the highlights. There are shines and saturation that cannot be displayed in SDR. Seeing these two images side by side without any knowledge, some might talk about different grading or even color revisionism. That's not the case. It is exactly the same image. It's just that the base image is too rich to be displayed in standard dynamic range, hence the differences with high dynamic range. Here is the same source, in linear, then in logarithmic, then converted to display in a standard cinema SDR, then for home SDR, then Dolby Cinema HDR, and finally home HDR. Depending on the display type, the perception is completely different. Let's return to this image. If I take this shot in high dynamic range and convert it to standard dynamic range, the result is clear. We have lost information, and it looks strikingly similar to the old 2012 Blu Ray version. Obviously, there are differences. I did not start from the master, but from an encoded version. It's the same image with almost the same grading, but in different display systems. I'm not saying there weren't some grading changes here and there, but we're essentially in the same ballpark. It's the same source that appears differently depending on the system used. This is not revisionism. Each of these images corresponds to technology in use at the time, and also to choices, whether from the director or the editors, or simply capture settings or the state of the copy. Who can tell me which of these images is the most faithful to the original? Who tells you that the reference version from 1995 still makes sense today? Let's talk a little about HDR. Regarding dynamic range, the contribution of HDR is relative. If we occasionally recover detail in the highlights, it's really very slight. Most of the time, we get a slightly brighter rendering, but very close to the previous SDR version. And regarding the blacks and the dark parts, they are equivalent to the previous SDR version. Some will tell you that the blacks are abyssal. I'm sorry, there are scenes that clearly lack information in the image. And that's my biggest concern with this edition. That the film is dark, with some pronounced color dominance, doesn't bother me. But these block blacks in HDR, I find that really unfortunate. I was really shocked when I watched the Japanese laserdisc version from 1986. There is information on the film. It's even sometimes like night and day. Now, when making such a dark color grading, of course, this information disappears. The real question, in my opinion, is if by re-scanning the film today, would we have more information in the image with an equivalent grading? And would it justify the cost of a new restoration where the film has to be completely clean frame by frame? And I have serious doubts. If it bothers me that Titanic or True Lies doesn't offer an image with a richer dynamic range, here it bothers me less. Terminator is a film from 1984 set in 1984 with its own codes and look. Do we really want Terminator to be clean and shiny with contrast levels as high as John Wick? I'm not really sure. So let's talk about the grain. Unlike some, I am quite unable to tell you that the grain structure was preserved by watching a compressed film that pulsed without having seen the sources before restoration and grading. There is a good chance that the film was degrained, processed, then regrained, as the whole appears very clean, coherent, and especially uniform. So, should we remove or keep the grain, add synthetic to homogenize it? Once again, it's a case-by-case basis, depending on the director's desires and the condition of the negative. Again, there is no law stating that the grain should not be modified. And compared to previous editions, there has been significant progress. The film's image is beautiful and organic. Whether the grain is original or synthetic, honestly, it doesn't really matter. So I see what you're thinking. You're going to tell me again that it's not the film as you discovered it. And there's surely someone who will point out that you can find a 35mm version without Cameron's modifications. Okay, well, let's talk about this version. If it can create an illusion in a few shots, the whole thing is bathed in a rather pronounced bluish tint that floods the entire image. And the least we can say is that it is not at all homogeneous. Some sequences are more affected than others, like the armory one. Or various scenes in the police station that are not color graded at all in the same way. I really have a hard time believing we're looking at a transparent scan. The black levels are very buried, much more than in the current version. If I already found it dark, there was still a minimum of detail in it. Now there's almost nothing left. The signal is totally cut off. The copy contains numerous stains, and the format does not conform to the projected version. I don't see how one can give credit to this version. We are still dealing with someone who, certainly under the guise of good intentions, wants to present the film as it was supposedly at its release. But the lack of uniformity in the overall rendering really raised questions about the nature of this transfer and its integrity. And the worst part is that an immeasurable number of people take it as gospel because it says 35mm scan on it. and it's not the 2012 grading. Some consider it superior to Cameron's version by arguing that it serves the preservation of the film. It's complete madness. In addition, the film was criticized for not offering a Dolby Vision encoding with the full enhancement layer, but just with the minimum enhancement layer. For those not familiar, an Ultra HD Blu Ray offering Dolby Vision consists of a base HDR10 layer, a processing edit reference module that contains the Dolby metadata, and an enhancement layer which can be either MEL for minimum enhancement layer or FEL for full enhancement layer. The minimum enhancement layer is faster to encode and takes up less space, and the full enhancement layer is the only way to recreate from the base layer a 12-bit content and intensities up to 4,000 nits. So I'll keep it short because once again, we are dealing with relatively complex topics. 12 bits in Dolby Vision is only mandatory for Dolby Cinema. For home exclusive content, it's recommended but not mandatory. And once and for all, Dolby Vision is an HDR format, not a grading. We only speak of Dolby Vision grading when grading for a Dolby Cinema room, which is specific grading for specific projection. A colorist grades HDR content for the home on a Grade 1 reference monitor. Whether it is an EZO, a Sony, an FSI, a Canon, or I don't know which, none of these monitors whose value ranges between 25,000 and 40,000 euros is Dolby Vision or 12 bits. So if the master was calibrated on a 10-bit monitor, I sincerely think you should survive the absence of 12 bits on your content encoded in HEVC 10 bits, displayed on TVs that are in any case incapable of displaying anything other than 10 bits. As for the 4,000 nits, Terminator rarely displays values that exceed 500 nits. Like the previous content, the brightness levels here are very reasonable, so the absence of full enhancement layer should not penalize you here. This content should be able to display without any problem on most HDR TVs without resorting to tone mapping. As you will have understood, we are once again dealing with a completely pointless controversy. I will skip over the fact that some criticized Cameron for modifying this shot by adding a blade here that was missing to correct a continuity error. Regarding the audio, let's talk about the return of the mono mix because many claim that the original mono mix had returned. I had these different versions analyzed, and here are the spectrograms. Here is the 1991 version with a single channel, the 1995 version, the 1997 DVD version in 2.1, the 2001 MGM DVD version in 2.0, and the new 2024 version. The one from 1991 is considered by purists as the most dynamic, aggressive, and rich. The one from 1995 has already undergone a little cleaning, and there are still differences that have widened over the years. But it is clear that the 2024 version is a new version that has undergone more significant cleaning. And this will be noticeable when listening if you are a purist who knows the sound of the old mixes by heart, especially if you have equipment capable of reproducing these subtleties. For the average person who does not make comparative studies, I doubt they could notice anything. It is time now to bring out the Terminator of audio processors, the Trinov Altitude 32, which will allow us to visualize the use of Atmos objects in a 3D space. And for those who have invested in an Atmos setup and are not really keen on being limited to mono, know that the Dolby Atmos track will let you hear the fury of Skynet spreading throughout your system and allow you to rediscover the film. The spatialization is superb on Reese's arrival, which is also much better executed than the arrival of the T800. The same goes for the entire scene in the Tech Noir, where the handling of music and slow motion effects is superbly highlighted. And of course, the sequences set in the future are truly a playground for using all kinds of effects. The outcome, well, whether some like it or not, the experience was very good for me. The image is truly beautiful. Having seen the evolution of this film in home video, this version surpasses the previous ones. I sincerely doubt that if you gather a panel of random people, there would be even one who prefers the image of a previous edition. Of course, it's not the HDR of the year, and even less a true restoration. Could we have had better? It's possible. But that's also where I don't follow you, because a new scan would certainly have resulted in a completely different outcome, with criticisms. You want to find the film in its original state and prefer a mono mix to a Dolby Atmos. Very well. But in that case, if we want to be logical, you have no reason to want HDR. I also find it very unfortunate that we didn't get all the extras. To conclude, I urge you to take a step back from the comments and the reviews you may read, especially those with screenshots that cannot accurately reproduce an HDR image. Post-production is not learned by watching 3 videos on YouTube, and having the latest OLED TV and a collection of Blu Rays has never made someone an expert in workflow or photochemistry. Despite having 20 years of post-production behind me, I am quite incapable of precisely guessing the work that has been done or the state of the sources. It's still unfortunate to see people cancel their editions after reading reviews based on totally inaccurate screenshots, and whose interpretation is, moreover, often completely off the mark. Not to mention the fact that some make reviews without even having seen the film. I can understand the disappointment of some, and even the grievances with the use of artificial intelligence that sometimes produces results that are simply hideous. But under the guise of wanting to defend physical media, some restoration white knights sometimes, in my opinion, with their amalgams, do more harm to the cause than the practices they denounce. As for you, James, if today you are sitting on such a mountain of money and you can produce the next episodes of the Smurfs in space, it's thanks to the audience and the fans, including the hardcore fans and those who live in their mom's basement, who went to see and buy all the editions of your films. Please don't forget that. Many thanks to David Fakrikian, without whom this video could not have existed. Subscribe, share this video. I know I don't publish often, but I'm preparing a video from my basement for next year that should please you. Take care and stay calm. It's not worth getting worked up. They are just movies. I wish you all the best for the upcoming new year. Goodbye.